Can you start off by telling us a little bit more about what led you into working in corporate finance?
Yeah.
Or did you, as a small girl, did you think this is what you're going to do? Or trace this path for us.
Yeah, sure. So I think it really started back in college when I took a finance class. I had a fascinating professor who spent a few years on Wall Street, and he really brought the topic to life for us. And it's like, oh, now I understand what's going on in the Wall Street Journal, and that really spiked my interest in finance. So after college, as you mentioned, I started out my career in investment banking, and then moved on to private equity. After a few years on Wall Street, though, I really wanted to get closer to the business, and I wanted to see if I could use my finance knowledge to really drive business decisions. And so when the opportunity came up to join Dropbox in 2012, I jumped at the opportunity.
Now that you've seen life at Stripe, life at Dropbox, are there any sort of high-level comparisons or ways that they frame up the way that companies grow their finance orgs? Or what are some themes or trends that you can distill from your experience?
There's some similarities to how every company will grow their finance organization. There are a few foundational building blocks as to how you approach building a finance organization. So for example, every finance org is going to start with an accounting or a bookkeeping function, and then you kind of build on top of that over time. Mm-hmm. But what I also realized is that depending on the type of business you're running, depending on the stage of growth, and depending on your business objectives, the kinds of finance organization you build can look quite different. So for example, if you are a private, bootstrapped software company that has no intention of ever going public, you just want to remain private forever and grow at a steady clip, your finance organization is going to look very different than a hyper-growth, venture-backed, cash-burning startup that has ambitions to expand globally. So yes, you can get quite custom and quite sophisticated in how you ultimately configure your finance organization.
What does your day-to-day look like?
In my current position, I work across a number of different functions. So I work on capital raises and investor relations. I work on M&A. I work on product finance and also strategic pricing, depending on the time of year and depending on the projects that I'm working on right now. My day-to-day could look quite different. But I think what's probably most relevant for more businesses is the finance and strategy aspect of what I do. The finance and strategy team is the team that partners with the rest of the business to help them kind of manage their financial performance and make sure that as a whole, the company is tracking towards its financial objectives. I guess a good way to think about this is, how publicly traded companies do their earnings calls every quarter. And on those earnings calls, the CEO would say, oh, and this year we are going to do this much in revenue and this much in EBITDA. I would venture to say that to the average non-finance employee in a company, like to the average engineer or designer or whoever, that means absolutely nothing. And so it really is the job of the finance organization to kind of be that bridge between our financial objectives and the rest of the company. And so what that entails would just be, working on pulling kind of our financial performance today, kind of analyzing how we're tracking against our forecast, and having lots of conversations with the business to understand why are we doing better or why are we doing worse, and trying to come up with ideas for how we can be steering the company in a different way.
And so you mentioned that the first hire, or the first sort of sub-discipline that you tend to build out is the bookkeeping / accounting arm.
Right.
Can you say more about when you choose to do that and what comes next?
Right. I would say it's a fairly, to me, especially as a finance person, is a fairly foundational aspect of your business that, and if I were a CEO, I would want to have some sort of basic bookkeeping function from day one. What does bookkeeping do? Basically, as a business, every day you make money, you spend money, and you just need to know where all this money is going, and you need to know how much money you have in the bank, and you need to know how much runway you have as a business. And really, a bookkeeping team or a simple accounting team is the function that helps you maintain and build those records.
And what tends to come next?
Again, it depends a little bit on the business itself, but usually, if it's not already part of the accounting team, I would say what I call basic finance operations comes next. So this would be, functions like payroll, having someone who's going to pay your company's bills, having someone who's going to manage your company's corporate credit cards, for example. This would come next.
And ballpark, or in general, what size or what complexity are we talking about when we're at the point where you need these things?
Right.
Or what milestones have you reached, perhaps?
Yeah, so I guess, again, it depends a little bit on the business, and it probably depends a little bit on the founder and the CEO and how much appetite he or she has for managing these aspects of the business. In general, I would say if it's not a core competitive advantage to what you are doing, if you're building software, you probably should not be spending too much of your time managing payroll. It probably makes sense to either outsource it or just hire someone to take care of these things for you.
Absolutely. And how do you think about, or paint a picture for us, maybe based on Stripe or Dropbox or other experience, how the various teams in the finance and accounting org fit together and how they fit with the other functions of the company, and what makes for a really great relationship, or what have you seen not work or be an area for improvement?
Okay, sure. So I'll answer your first question. So I would say, the most basic sort of components of a financial organization, if you will, as I mentioned earlier, would be bookkeeping / accounting and some of these finance operational type of functions. And then typically what you will see after that is you start bringing in a financial planning and analysis, or FP&A team. As I mentioned, accounting is the function that tells you where your money is. It gives you a system of record and helps you understand where you are today. A financial planning analysis team is a team that serves like two important functions. One is based on based on the past trajectory of your business, it can provide you with a little bit more visibility into where you're going next. And so typically the FP&A team is a team that builds the forward-looking forecasts and the projections for the company, or the budget for the company, so you have a sense for how much money you're going to make next year, how much money you're going to spend next year, and how do you manage your finances next year. The FP&A team is also the team that dives more deeply into helping you understand what's driving your financial performance. So, if you notice that revenue just keeps growing,
doesn't always.
Right. You're probably asking, oh, that's so great. I wonder why it's growing and how can we grow more of it? And this is where it's helpful to have a financial analyst who can go into the numbers to understand, peel back the layers, understand what are drivers, and how you can kind of start to optimize your financial performance.
What makes for really great relationships between finance and accounting and the other business units? Mm-hmm. Or where have you seen there can be sources of risk or friction that need correcting?
In order for the finance and accounting organization to have a good relationship with the rest of the business, it really starts from the tone at the top. So, it's very helpful when the CEO or the founder views finance as a strategic function and views finance as an indispensable partner to the business. I think it's very easy to see finance as like the cop, or the function that tells me I can't spend any money. And to a certain extent, that is their job. But they can provide a lot of insight and valuable information about your business.
Are there financial triumphs that are memories of yours, or perhaps financial catastrophes that you're able to speak to, or things that you've learned from, or that you've seen companies learn from, that might be good stories for other for startup founders or other folks to hear? The good and the bad.
Yeah, I have been fortunate enough, I think, to have never have worked at the company that faced a serious financial catastrophe, but I think, not going to name any names, but if you just kind of do some Googling on early startups, there are a lot of stories out there of how companies who did not kind of have a good understanding of just the state of their financials, and were 48 hours from payday realized they could not make payroll and ultimately had to file for bankruptcy. Just even a very simple example like that could really underscore the importance of having strong financial records. In terms of financial triumphs, Probably a pretty good one would be actually about Dropbox, where we both worked. So if you guys look at their S1 filing, one of the trends that got everyone very excited was how they were able to increase their gross margins and decrease their infrastructure spend significantly over the course of the last 3 years. Obviously, a lot of that credit goes to the awesome infrastructure engineering team who worked on optimizing our backend. But I remember when I was at Dropbox, one of the key pieces of analysis the finance team did was look into what was driving so much of the costs, and we realized there was just a lot of inefficiencies in the way we were storing our data, and we were able to make a recommendation to the infrastructure team to rectify that.
What do you think that a lot of startups get wrong about building their financial organizations?
I think there are very few things that are kind of genuinely unfixable. So, I wouldn't say there's anything that I've seen that has gone terribly wrong. But I do think companies can save themselves a lot of pain down the road if they, one, just start thinking about it a little bit earlier, and to, like I mentioned before, have the right kind of mindset and attitude towards finance. I would also say a third thing that I think, especially in Silicon Valley and in this day and age, companies should start thinking about how tools and automation can play a large part in their finance organization. Instead of relying on paper invoices or Excel manual tracking in Excel spreadsheets. There are lots of great tools out there that you can use to make your finance operations a lot more efficient. I've also seen finance teams work really well with data analytics teams to kind of automate a lot of the data ingestion or a lot of the report building.
Do you have any examples that you can speak to? Maybe more concrete examples of like workflows or changes that have been facilitated by using the right tooling, or as maybe the organizations have grown, maybe at Stripe or Dropbox, like how workflows have been able to evolve or get more sophisticated when leveraging the right tools.
Right. I guess just to use a very simple example, Stripe is currently at the point where headcount planning is a fairly complex undertaking. So we're more than 1,000 employees. We're distributed across, I think, 16 offices around the world. And so everyone always needs to hire more people, right? Because you're in this fast growth environment, it always feels like you need more people on deck. So the process of having a headcount budget, sending that budget out to every single sort of team lead across the company, getting their feedback, bringing it back up to sort of like the centralized planning unit, and iterating on that plan is incredibly. It was done in Excel spreadsheets, and it was incredibly manual. And so we are in the process of putting in place just a hosted tool. I mean, you can think of it almost as a glorified Google spreadsheet, but obviously with much more sophisticated functionality, so that every single leader at Stripe can simply go in and enter their headcount and look at their headcount numbers and enter their headcount requests, and we can all of the workflow and all of the iteration can happen in this hosted environment.
Totally. What are some easy things to get right when setting up the financial stack or the financial processes for your company, for your startup?
Okay, so maybe instead of like the specific input, I'll talk more about maybe the output that can guide your decisions around the input, which is, I think, if the founder and CEO treats some key financial metrics like revenue, expenses, burn, and ending cash balance, the same way they would view sort of other other core KPIs for the business, and make it a habit to just review it, I don't know, at least once a month. That's like a very easy win, I think, and that would kind of tee up the right questions and the right thoughts around, okay, how do we evolve the finance organization?
Going back to sort of the early days of companies,
sure.
So for a typical tech company, when is the right time to make that first full-time finance hire? And maybe even more importantly, what is the right profile for that hire?
Right.
Or what are the attributes that really sort of align with success for that startup environment?
Right. I would say the first hire, it just has to be a bookkeeper, in my opinion. And in terms of the right hire, I think typically it's someone who you just want someone who is well versed in the bookkeeping tools that are available, and it's also helpful if this person has prior experience in your specific industry. Although like accounting obviously abides by very fixed principles across all business models, but each business model does have its own nuances, and having someone who's like familiar with how you think about revenue, how you think about expense in a particular model would be very helpful.
And so similar question for a controller and for a CFO. When do companies think about hiring for those roles, and what are the profiles that are going to be the best things to be looking at?
Again, I think it just really depends on the business, but I would say in general, you start thinking about having a controller when there are multiple bookkeepers or multiple accountants that you need someone to sort of manage and coordinate all of them, and sort of make sure that all of the work goes through a QA sort of process. In terms of when you need a CFO, again, it depends on the business itself, but I would say, once you start having maybe more than one finance function, so you had a bookkeeping function or accounting function, and now you have payroll and you have accounts payables, and you also you're starting to think about having your first financial planning person. Once you have these different functions, it might make sense to start thinking about having a CFO. And also, once the CEO feels like he needs a strategic partner to discuss finance-related matters, that could also be a good sign that it's time for a CFO.
And how do you think about in-house versus outsourced bookkeeping?
Yeah, I've seen both models work really well. So, both at Dropbox and at Stripe, my team worked on a number of M&A deals where we acquired some startups, earlier stage startups, and obviously one of the key pieces of diligence we do is the financial diligence, and so we ask these startups for their books, and we have been able to work well with them, whether it's with an in-house person or with an outsourced bookkeeper. Obviously, with an in-house person, the benefit you get is that you have more rapid iteration and you have more rapid responses when you have questions. But what we have found is that when the outsourced bookkeeper actually has a very strong understanding of the business, or when the outsourced bookkeeper makes time to meet with the CEO or founder once a month, so that there is that back and forth, it can also work really well.
Most startup founders don't have a formal background in finance and accounting, right. Or certainly most tech founders don't have a formal background in finance and accounting. What are the things that actually matter? Like, what are the concepts, or like what pieces of finance and accounting are actually things that startup founders should have in their heads, even if you're going to be hiring out or outsourcing some of the legwork on it? What's important for founders to actually understand so that they can understand the state of their business?
Right. I guess like a founder should just know that at the end of every month, at the very least, he or she should plan to sit down and just know what the company's like basic financial metrics are. Like how much money did we make this month? What is our revenue? How much money did we spend this month? What is our expense? And how much cash do we have in the bank? And what does that mean in terms of runway for the company? I think just knowing those basics would really tee up further questions for like the finance, the accounting and finance organization to kind of go work on and build upon.